Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Welcome. We are the best and only show offering a global platform for writers and poets. We are the Parrot Literary Corner, and today we feature Bill Arnott, is the best-selling author of the Gamble novellas, Forever Cast and Endless Time, poetry, award-winning memoir Gone Viking, a travel saga, travelogue sequence, and sequel Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries, and #1 bestseller, Bill Arnott's Beat, Road Stories and Writer's Tips. For his travel expeditions and popular presentations, Bill has been granted a fellowship at London's Royal Geographical Society. When not trekking the globe with a small pack, journal, and laughably an outdated camera phone, Bill can be found on Canada's West Coast, making music and friends. I am Dustin Pickering. We will be interviewing him today, Mr. Bill Arnott. Glad to have you. How are you doing?
Dustin, I'm fine. It's Bill Arnott. It rhymes with
Arnott.
darn it. So yeah.
Darn it, I messed it up.
Hey,
Darn it.
That's a common one. That sucks.
Yeah.
So years ago, a buddy at school said, gosh, darn it, it's Bill Arnott. And then that stuck. So, but I appreciate that warm introduction, and it's a treat to be here as part of the Parrot Literary Corner.
Well, thank you for joining us. It'll be an excellent discussion. We hope to explore your travel world and your poetry. And so hopefully you have some poetry for us a little bit later in the program. First question involves Vikings, actually, since you've been writing on Vikings. The term's kind of maligned. It's like a malicious warrior that went around and just bashed people. And, so what is a Viking actually? What does that actually mean, historically speaking?
Yeah, let's set that tone right. So it's a good question, Dustin, and that is a common misnomer that Vikings were marauders and pillagers. And but my first travel memoir called Gone Viking, a travel saga, I really played off the fact that the word Viking was originally a verb, small v, and it meant to go voyaging. But a lot of the folks that were keeping written records at that time, Germans and Arabs and English, history isn't always written by the victors, and the Scandinavian explorers were doing much the same thing as others were elsewhere around the globe, emigrating, looking for arable land and new places to settle. And yes, sometimes violence was involved, but not always. It was often just looking for trade routes and maybe new pools to add to the gene pool, you know what I mean? And places to, like I say, emigrate, farm. A lot of these Viking voyagers, these explorers, were artisans and skilled tradespeople and farmers. You think about Scandinavia as a place, there's not a lot of arable land. Norway is very mountainous, is a good example. Denmark has always had a healthy, thriving population. So next thing you know, they're bulging at the seams. But one thing that separated the Scandinavian explorers apart is they were ahead of the curve with their technology. 1,000 years ago, they invented the keel under their boats, their long ships. So these explorers were able to navigate deeper open waters. And next thing you know, they're finding new places to explore and trade, and yes, at times conquer. So there's the long answer to what Viking is all about. And I sort of had fun spinning off of that. In my mind, I was going Viking, or I'd gone Viking, which is a voyage, a great epic odyssey that in my mind is worthy of writing down, the way the Icelandic sagas told the stories of their great explorers and people in history.
Excellent. So specific example of a Viking explorer, it was known as Crowbone. What can you tell us about him? And why did he choose to spread Catholicism? That's a strange, you wouldn't think of that as stereotypically speaking. So that was a big part of his journey.
There was a couple of great facets to that answer. So Crowbone was an intriguing one to me, and I did spend a lot of, so my 8-year trek in the wake of Scandinavian explorers, are basically following in the footsteps of a lot of these great adventurers, Olaf Crowbone being one of them, around the Celtic Sea in the North Atlantic. Eventually he was King Olaf I of Norway. And so in plying those waters, right around the turn of the millennium, it was becoming pretty obvious across Western Europe and Northwestern Europe that this Christianity, which was predominantly Catholicism, it wasn't going away. And there was a very clear trend there. And it was probably Harold Bluetooth, who was king of the Danes at the time, was one of the first to sort of get on the bandwagon and realize choosing a faith was as much a political move as anything. And Iceland did much the same thing. And then Crowbone was a great example of really a Christian Viking. And in order to save resources, no one was looking to go to war. No one was looking to pick a fight with anyone else, usually. And so deeming Christianity to be the official religion of those countries at that time, specifically Denmark and Norway, and a couple of hundred years later, Sweden joined in that sort of trend. But what I found fascinating, and you talk about sort of acceptance and open-mindedness, and was pretty cutting edge at the time, right around the first millennium, so the year 1000, and Iceland did the same thing, saying, well, we're officially Catholic nations, but almost like an aside or big stage whisper, it's common knowledge that anyone can worship whoever or whatever they want in the privacy of their own home. Just don't make a big to-do about it. As far as we're concerned, from a nation's perspective, here's our official religion. And I think, that's very liberal minded when you think about, the time and the place and the inclusivity, and maybe good examples we can take to this day.
Yeah, well, with the separation of church and state, for instance, as we have, and it's very modern Enlightenment era liberalism. That's very enlightened for someone for Vikings back in that period. You would think of them barbaric, living in these really fringe societies. That's sort of a stereotype. So what drew your interest in the Vikings, and when did you start kind of unraveling a lot of these myths and why there were sort of really kind of exaggerated falsehoods?
Well, I've been a passionate traveler for a lot of years, and then I've loved travel literature and reading about it. And there's so many great travel literary writers, whether we're talking about Jan Morris or Paul Theroux, or even great current examples like Bill Bryson or a Manisha Rajesh, or even Michael Palin is a great example who can do their research, engage, write a wonderful story, and still not be afraid to tell a joke now and again, which I love. So as I was doing all that sort of research just as a passionate reader, and I wanted to start living some of these adventures firsthand. But to answer your question, how did the Vikings sort of spark my fuse? I had a eureka moment. I was at the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, which is just outside of Copenhagen in Denmark. And there's a great world map on the wall everywhere that the Scandinavians, or the Vikings, went in their heyday, what they'd call the Golden Age of Vikings, from the sort of 8th to 11th century. And it looked like a map of world domination. Big red arrows going everywhere, covering basically the top half of the planet. And I thought, oh, that's inspiring. If I wanted to choose somewhere to go and to sort of follow in some of history's greatest explorers, I could go anywhere in the top half of our planet. And so then I started sort of digging down. I'd been traveling for a couple of years, had a lot of Scandinavian experience. And of course, you can't go anywhere in the British Isles, anywhere on the coast, without finding some elements of Viking history, or the Viking long ports, the mouths of the rivers where they would winter and repair their ships. And I just found that so motivating and exciting. And, like a kid in a candy store, I thought, oh, I want to go to there. Well, to there was like almost anywhere you want to, spin the globe and put your finger on the top half somewhere, and you've got probably a Viking destination.
Fascinating. This might be a dumb question, but how much did that era contribute to, say, something like the making of Beowulf?
Oh, there's a great question. And it's
a very mysterious document, I think.
It's a fascinating one, but it's a great example. And I'm glad you brought it up, Dustin, because I liken Beowulf to an early Anglo-Saxon version of what the Icelandic authors a few hundred years later were writing in their classic sagas, where you get this lovely blend of, there's definitely history. They're
Mhm.
talking about people's lineage and things that happened, but it's a little bit blurry around the edges where myth and legend blend. And, I don't mean to offend anyone, but we could argue there's facets of that to any great script, any great religious document, any great historical document. The history of Britain that was first penned entailed lots of myth and legend to go along with the historical facts. So Beowulf, to me, from a timeline perspective, it just precedes what we'd call the Golden Age of Vikings, or an archaeologist and an anthropologist, they both use the term, so now I use the term proto-Vikings, like just the precursor to what we'd think of as those folks rowing the long ships. But the fact of the matter is, there were like small v Vikings, voyagers, Norse explorers. They'd been traveling around for a couple of thousand years, even though the engineering of their ships wasn't quite as advanced. Over in the Baltic states, and even as far down towards the Gibraltar and the Mediterranean, there's a record of ancient ships still ahead of the curve compared to, so like some of the Irish were sailing across the sea in leather boats. So it's with a bit of courage and, or perhaps no alternatives, it's amazing what you can do with a bit of effort and wind and a pair of oars.
Right. And what makes this interesting is that it would be easy to trace historically and archaeologically because it's a very special artifact. And when you run across it, it's like, okay, we know who this is, so it leaves an imprint. That's fascinating. I appreciate you sharing that. So do you have any poetry you'd like to read for us?
Oh, sure. Well, it would be, to not make it too big of a leap, I've got something that I'm proud of. It won an award, and it was inspired by my Gone Viking travels. And I actually composed this when I was in Greenland, going towards Eric the Red settlement. That's where Leif Erikson was born. And so just like our conversation about Beowulf or the sagas where fact and myth sort of blur, and I always liken it to, a horizon point or sea mist, and this one is called Yggdrasil. So in my mind, Norse mythology was swirling around that place, and it's a pretty neat place, Greenland, where you've got arguably one of the first places where East met West as far as a sort of a European perspective goes, because the Greenlandic indigenous people, which would be a sort of a genealogical branch of Inuit, and then you've got these very fair Western Europeans and meeting in and around Greenland. So all this stuff is swirling in my head, and it feels very prevalent in the land there, these vast open spaces. It seems timeless. Anyways, I give you Yggdrasil, and it's spelled Yggdrasil, and this comes from Norse mythology, but this is a very real experience.
There's actually a poetry journal by that name as well.
Well, all right, then.
Based in Canada, I believe.
Oh, cool. Okay, they may have, this one of mine appears in my poetry book, Forever Cast in Endless Time. And like I say, I let the artist run a little bit into the realm of myth along with this personal experience. It goes like this. Yggdrasil, the world tree, Mother Ash, stands astride a Nordic knoll beyond Uppsala's temples, where every god, the real ones, take meat and mead amongst the Norns, Weird, Verdandi, and Skuld. And atop the tree, the eagle with no name resides, witness to our lives and spindle whorls of fate, sharing its area with a hawk named Vedrfolnir, the witherer of wind. When I saw the eagle, I was drifting on a wooden arc through looming crags of crystal-leaded ice. Naturlik, whispered the Greenlander, aurora eyes squinting into cloudless Arctic sky. And together we watched the giant sail across a canvas of calcium blue. The hawk invisible to us, but its presence, though, we felt in the eagle's sweeping gaze, removing every trace of wind, breath sucked silent from our lungs, a contour feather, whoosh, the only sound. Thanks.
Wow, and congratulations on the award. That's well deserved. I mean, I really felt that really flowed, and the articulation, and there's very much a storytelling feel to it, and just really appreciated the entire drift of it. And thanks for sharing that.
Thank you,
So
Dustin.
that was just lovely, absolutely lovely. So do you have any really, other than the ones you've already shared, do you have any other exciting travel stories, like where maybe you encountered some interesting people and had some conflicts of maybe communication or just something kind of a faux pas?
Oh yeah, so I'm going to go back to the Greenlandic experience because that was a
Okay.
pretty special one, and it did test me physically and physiologically,
Hmm.
because I had to do a decent overland trek to get between these little communities that were important to me, sort of these that had significant Viking touchstones or history about them. And so I found myself in a little lodge. I guess there were maybe, and it was the only place around to get a cooked meal. This community had maybe 20 dwellings in it, and there was a hostel. And so maybe at best there might have been 36 people around. And anyone that just wanted a cooked meal, that didn't want to do it themselves, would come to this one little place. So there must have been a dozen of us, a third of the population, seated around this table. Well, imagine like this sort of polyglot of languages. English was not the main one being spoken there. So if I had to hazard a guess, we had a lovely sort of family style dining, and we were speaking about 60% of the conversation was French. If we were to draw this in a Venn diagram, we all realized, oh, everyone had a handful of French, and there was a little bit of Swiss, a little bit of English, a little bit of Greenlandic, maybe 25% Danish, and then a bunch of sort of charades, a lot of talking with hands and that kind of thing. And then sort of one of the people was clever enough to get up, and they had like a whiteboard and some erasable markers. So we were able to sort of figure out like what we were eating. She drew a whale, and we realized, oh yeah, we're having whale stew, because not everyone necessarily knows, oh, what's that word in your language? Or so that was a great, and it was one of the most lovely, engaging evenings I've had. And we're all talking this sort of pidgin, and I imagine that's what it's been like in port towns amongst sailors for, as long as there have been port towns and sailors. But that was a neat one, and it spoke to me about, well, we can communicate so much more beyond just this oral language that we, choose to hook our wagons to.
Right, definitely. That's something very exciting to be around all these different languages and people trying to speak to each other, and there's a little confusion, but a little fun too, and a little tussle going on of, and I just can imagine someone drawing the whale on the board saying, "That's what you're eating there,"
Yes, and if these, if you remember the old game Pictionary, I mean, this is someone.
Yeah.
Most of us can't do a decent likeness of a whale, so of course you did like a child's likeness where it's got the spouting water and a happy face, but we still figured it out. It looked a bit like Moby Dick, and even as I'm sharing this story with you, Dustin, it makes me realize that, of course, everyone sitting around that table was pretty open to jumping in with both feet and saying yes. No one was going to go there to be a wallflower. That takes some courage to jump in and to screw up, and to, maybe someone's going to laugh at you, but it's all in good, it's in kindness and good humor. I think that was a lovely example that, I'd like to take that everywhere I go if I could.
Right. Have you ever had an experience, a situation where you were actually either terrified or maybe nervous, like you ran into something, I don't know, a strange animal even, that you didn't recognize or something of that nature?
Getting to that community in Greenland, that was a personal test. That was a biggie, but that was just sort of physical limitations and saying, well, I can do this. I really don't feel I was in any danger there. But back to your scary animals, this wasn't really part of my Viking adventures, but I did inspired by so many of those Norse mythologies. Here, where I am in British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, we've got lots of similar history and tales in our First Nations Indigenous people, with the raven is a recurring a character and a very important spiritual creature. So my point being, I was following what's called the Spirit Trail, and a lot of it ties in with the corvids, ravens, crows, these animals. And so it was a span of 4 days that I broke up, 4 one-day hikes going across a couple of mountain ridge lines here in southwestern British Columbia. And this would have been late summer. And it was my first up close personal encounter with a bear. But when you asked, was anything terrifying? It's before you see the animal and you start hearing branches crack, and something deep down from the days of, when our ancestors had to run away from predators on savanna. I just knew, I am not at the top of this food chain. And so I do the initial, hello, perhaps it's another hiker coming. It's not another hiker coming. But the way the noise of the branches cracking, all I thought was, this is big. And I am just a little wee speck in the grand scheme of things. And I hope this goes okay. Now, the other thing is, you may think, you just got to know how to handle bears or behave around them, because those animals aren't looking to pick a fight. But unfortunately, you can take from this what you will. I guess we've encroached on their turf, and even our black bears are mauling people on occasion, because we've messed with their ecosystem, and they're not looking for a fight, but they aren't necessarily docile. So it is prudent to be cautious and take care. And that was one that sort of tapped into something that I didn't expect when I'm just out for a hike in nature.
You can learn quite a bit just randomly traveling and revisiting these places and so forth. So I'm curious, how did your travel expenses change and your perceptions of them change after joining the Royal Geographic Society?
Oh, thank you. That was a huge privilege. So after, completing and writing this Gone Viking, a travel saga, which was, bits and pieces, but 8 years of concentrated travel and research. And what I love about now this fellowship with the Royal Geographical Society of London is it has to be nominated by a couple of other fellows, and then it goes through a board process. And they use the term fellow to apply to women and men. And it just made me appreciate going forward. I feel perhaps a greater sense of responsibility in my travel literature writing. I want to, and something that I'm very passionate about, and I get up on a little bit of a soapbox, I feel that we all have an obligation as travelers, as most of us are. First off, I say travel does not have to be about leaving the house. And I've been saying this since long before pandemic was our norm. Some people either can't physically, financially, necessarily leave a room, but you can still be a great traveler with an open mind and a desire to learn and grow. And some of my favorite travel memoirs have been written by people who have not left their home, certainly through research and experience and just an open-mindedness. So I leveraging off of that, I thought as a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, I want people to know that travel is so much more than maybe getting on a plane or a bus and leaving a carbon footprint. I like the idea of people doing things mindfully, and knowing that engaging with an individual where you live, someone that you hadn't visited with before, or making an effort or having an open mind. I think that's what travel is, a tactile, sensory experiences that go much beyond just accumulating stamps in a passport.
Right.
And that's something I feel very strongly about. And I scoff a little bit at folks that are just sort of looking for an excuse to write their travel book. I had to go to because, I was unhappy at my job or my relationship. And these are all valid things, but don't kid a kidder. For those of us that like reading this stuff, you didn't have to bike across Europe, for example, to save the planet or to save your relationship. You wanted to bike across Europe. So just say that. And now write an engaging tale, and I will gladly purchase your book and support you. But I have no patience for folks who try to justify the fact that they just want to go wandering. Tell us the truth and get on with it. And then write as well as you can.
Self-honesty is the writer's best friend. If you want to make a big gimmick out of your writing, then you're lost. You've already lost me. I feel the same way. It's so many writers that put these little stamps and neat little ideas behind why they're doing what they're doing, and and it's just like, yeah, that's really kind of dullard of you.
Well said.
Yeah. So, in all the places you've visited over the years, I'm sure you've traveled quite a bit for a long time. What are some of your favorite places to visit, and how have they changed over the years?
So I've had the the sequel to Gone Viking, a travel saga, is Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries. And I have the great joy of sharing that. To answer your question, is Gone Viking 2, Beyond Boundaries encapsulates not only some of the places and destinations I was experiencing during the time I was writing the first book, but a bit leading up to that, and some destinations that I had the privilege of seeing after that first book was published. So Beyond Boundaries touches on a lot of my favorite locales. There's still that theme of exploring and voyaging, and my books will always have a bit of adventure, a bit of history, and a whole lot of humor. Now, that's a terribly long-winded way of getting to answer your question, but some of my favorites, mine and my wife's as well, have been in Oceania, like around New Zealand and Australia. We've been privileged to have many excursions there and to see a lot of really cool things. Back to your animal question, we've seen some exotic, to us, very exotic, different animals. Nothing too terrifying, but a lot of really neat flora as well as the fauna. And yeah, there's and I guess as a Canadian or American, a Northern North American, there's a familiarity certainly with the language and currency and modes of transportation. So there's a simplicity, and literally when we've been able to take time off from our traditional jobs, the inverse season in the southern hemisphere has been agreeable. So you want to go away for Christmas and New Year's, when it's often easier for a lot of us to take time off from an office job. It's lovely down there, and you can get out on the trails. Mm-hmm. And they don't have bears or cougars. So that was another biggie. You can be off bushwhacking and feel fairly confident in your personal safety.
Interesting. So is it a very temperate area? Is it's like, too humid or exhaustively hot?
Well, even a smaller country like New Zealand has a great array because that sliver of land runs north and south. Mm-hmm. So at the north end of the country of New Zealand, it's very temperate and humid, and they can have some jungly type terrain, and it's often very, very warm. But in the southern parts of New Zealand, I mean, there's nothing between you and the South Pole but a bit of the Southern Ocean, and they can have some miserable, inclement, cold weather and long, nasty winters. They've got Southern Alps down there, so they're skiing as well. And Australia is such a great big landmass. They have a little of everything, but it's way more arid, generally speaking, across the way. And they do have great swaths of forest and a lovely diversity of microclimates and little climactic zones. But I think there's more diversity for climate and geography in New Zealand.
Interesting. So we have a remaining, 8 or 9 minutes, and I had an interesting question that how are you coping with the restlessness of this COVID era that we're going through? You can't really do as much traveling, obviously, I would assume.
Yeah, certainly not the physical traveling, right, but back to my saying, we can certainly travel through other means. The pages of a book. My wife and I really got into ebooks much more so, because I like going to the library as well. So interestingly enough, this time has opened up a lot of other avenues and channels for us. I've been going through a lot more travel type documentaries and experiencing things vicariously, and great opportunities to do more research and learn more rather than just bumbling about in person. So that's been okay. And I think it speaks volumes, no pun intended, but for the book industry, has been going like gangbusters during lockdown. People are reading more, which just I find so encouraging. Perhaps it's because we've watched everything on Netflix, but
Right.
aside from that, it's nice to know that ink on paper still resonates with people in a sort of timeless manner.
Absolutely. I think that this period has allowed us to slow down and calm ourselves a little bit and take a little break. I mean, we're always at the grind or out doing something, and this gives us a little bit of a pause to really and just kind of enjoy. Not really have to worry about the next minute. Most of us, I think. So
Nicely said. I'd agree with you wholeheartedly.
So, and if you can, in maybe like a couple of minutes, what place of, what site have you seen that you found the most beautiful in nature that in your travels and in your journeys?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think it'd be easier for me to make a little top list of favorite places. Greenland was very special. And again, at the risk of sounding like an eco-warrior, I mean, you see it real time there. Glacier melting and the icebergs that wind up in Newfoundland. I mean, you see, and the fact that we all have probably a fridge or air conditioners, we're making that happen. And that's a bit terrifying. So yes, I took a flight to get there, but I'm very cognizant of that, and I'm not going to go there repeatedly. So that was but there was great beauty there. I was on my own and seemingly in the middle of nowhere. People who live there would say, hey, this isn't the middle of nowhere. But I did a great long trek, and wouldn't you know it, another lone hiker comes by going the other way. And again, through sort of muddled, broken English and French, we realized he said, oh, he had been a missionary in Africa, and I believe it was Namibia. Anyways, he said, man, I thought that was a quiet place when you could go for miles and hear nothing. He said, but this place, Greenland, he said, this is really quiet, which just speaks to the vast openness. And within that openness, I just find an inherent beauty. And like sort of obvious stuff, I mean, I still love a great beach. It doesn't have to be a sandy tropical beach. In the Hebrides off the west coast of Scotland, there are a ton of gorgeous rustic islands and beaches, and that's some of the world's oldest stone, like a 3 billion years old, 3.5. So it's part of the original Earth's core that's cooled, and it forms into wonderful shapes. You've probably know like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, and there's facets of that across the ocean in Scotland, where you see these hexagonal stones. And then there was another magical one down in southeast New Zealand, these Moraki boulders, where the Earth spits out these huge, perfectly spherical boulders. And that's remarkable. Imagine seeing the world's biggest marble match on the beach. And then when they do break down, again, you see this remarkable hexagonal, but a honeycomb looking center. So it feels as though you're getting a little glimpse into the center of the Earth, a journey to the Jules Verne kind of stuff.
So what kind of advice or wisdom or words of encouragement do you have for writers writing today and tomorrow and whoever may watch the program? If you have anything you'd like to say to them, as far as it can be a very daunting task at times. And so I think it's good to have some words of encouragement towards the end of the program, if you'd like to share any.
Of course. So I feel terribly privileged. Just the other day, got another literary award for Gone Viking, a travel saga. And as lovely as that is, it makes me want to say to every writer, knowing that we're all doing the very same thing. And each and every one of us has a unique story to share. And so I encourage not only anyone and everyone that wants to write, but don't ever forget why you're doing it. commercial success can be nice, but that should not be the motivator. I have felt equally proud of something I have on a zip drive that I set on a shelf and share with no one.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say to folks something that I've been proud to do to the best of my ability, and I encourage everyone to always work at improving your craft.
Mm-hmm.
Always hone your writing. Let yourself, keep raising your bar. Write as well as you can, and then improve on it.
Excellent advice. I think that's perfect. You don't have to be rich and famous to be excellent, and you can always be more excellent than you start off as. It's definitely something that's a good thing to live for. Really, is continuously improve and telling your own story. It's very positive. So if you want to spend the next minute or so just saying thank you or hello to anybody out there who has and influenced you or been a bedrock for your career.
Well, this would tie into my advice for writers. That's something I'm passionate about, is be a fan of your fellow writers. Be a fan of your peers, your mentors, your students. Wave the flag and celebrate others' success. That's one of the surest ways to be part of that group, and to genuinely be delighted when someone else gets an award, or someone else gets a publishing deal, or someone else finishes their first manuscript. These are things to celebrate, and always remember that. And that's something I've always been saying thank you to my mentors, but I learn constantly from folks that I've taught. I'm always learning from my peers. I like surrounding myself by people who perpetually raise the bar for me. We take our writing seriously. We don't take ourselves too seriously. And I think that is a great sustainable source of energy and creativity. Do your best. Don't take yourself too seriously, but take your writing fairly seriously. Having said that, if you've got a great joke and you can write it well, always include a great, well-written joke.
Absolutely. Like darn it, Arnott.
Well, okay, we can thank my classmate from 40 years ago, Julie Cockell in Vernon, British Columbia, for coming up with "Gosh darn it, it's Bill Arnott."
Excellent.
So there's one, and I've had.
Oh, we lost you there. This has been the New York Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering. We talked to Bill Arnott, and we discussed traveling and many other great, wonderful words of wisdom here. If you missed them, go back through the program and watch this again. This has been a great hour of discussion about writing and traveling and what it is to travel. So this is the only and best show you will find on the internet for creative writers globally. And we're looking for more of you guys out there to help join us on work with our platform. We are available at Literary Corner at NewYorkParrot.com. And if you would like to donate, we have paypal.me/NYParrot, in which we're collecting to improve our programming. So thank you very much for joining us, Bill. And this has been the great